April 7, 1945. Tokyo Bay, Empire of Japan. As dawn breaks across the Japanese home islands, 91 North American P-51D Mustangs from the 15th and 240 fighter groups approach their rendezvous point. Inside his cockpit, Major James B. Tapp clutches the control stick. His six-wing mounted .050 caliber M2 Browning machine guns are loaded with armor-piercing incendiary rounds. Early model P-51Ds carry 500 rounds for each inboard gun and 270 for the center and outboard positions, totaling 200 rounds. Later variants would reduce this to 400 rounds per inboard gun for improved reliability, bringing the total to 188 rounds. Below, Mount Fuji stands out against the clear morning sky, a familiar landmark for pilots navigating through mission routes. The rising sun casts long shadows across the Japanese countryside, revealing rice fields, villages, and military installations that had never before encountered American fighters. This mission is unprecedented, escorting B-29 Superfortresses deep into the heart of Japan from a base 750 miles away, a distance previously considered impossible for single-engine fighters just 2 years earlier. At 07:15 hours, over 100 Japanese interceptors converge on the American formation. Through the morning mist emerges a sight that shocks Japanese pilots to their core: single-engine American fighters over Tokyo, something their commanders had assured them was unattainable. These are not short-range carrier-based Navy fighters but land-based Army Air Force aircraft that have somehow traversed 705 miles of open ocean to appear above the Imperial capital. Leading the Japanese defense are pilots flying the Nakajima Ki-84 Frank, Japan's fastest and most advanced fighter, alongside older Ki-43 Hayabusas, Ki-46 61 Idens, and Enun-Ka-2 J Shidens. The Ki-84 could outclimb and outmaneuver both the P-51 and the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt at certain altitudes and speeds. What follows will reveal a significant technological gap between two nations' approaches to air warfare and underscore why American industrial might had produced what many pilots would consider the perfect long-range fighter aircraft. The North American P-51D Mustang had already established its reputation in European skies, where it broke the back of the Luftwaffe and made daylight bombing of Germany possible. Initially developed for export to Britain, models adapted by British engineers to use Rolls-Royce Merlin engines became America's most formidable wartime fighter aircraft. The transition from Allison-powered early versions to the powerful Merlin-equipped variant marked one of aviation's most successful international collaborations, blending American aerodynamic expertise with British engine technology. This union of the legendary Merlin and the P-51 Mustang culminated in the P-51D model, which offered the U.S. Army Air Forces a high-performance fighter capable of escorting heavy bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The Packard V1657 engine, a licensed version of the Rolls-Royce Merlin 66, generated 11655 horsepower at takeoff with water injection, increasing to 163 horsepower under emergency war settings. This Stage 2, speed supercharged power plant maintained high performance even in thin atmospheric conditions where Japanese engines struggled due to their single-stage superchargers. The P-51D achieved a top speed of approximately 440 mph at an altitude of 25,000 feet and reached an operating ceiling of almost 46,000 feet. It was armed with 6 wing-mounted .50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns. The sheer firepower delivered by these weapons was formidable, firing at a rate of 800 rounds per minute each. The P-51D could unleash 4,000 rounds per minute, equivalent to 80 rounds every second. Each armor-piercing incendiary round weighed 46 grams and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, capable of penetrating aircraft armor, igniting fuel tanks, and disabling engines with just a few well-placed shots. By the end of 1944, 14 out of the 15 fighter squadrons in the U.S. 8th Air Force were composed of Mustangs, underscoring its superiority over other fighters. North American Aviation's plants in Inglewood, California, and Dallas, Texas, churned out P-51s at an astonishing rate, with a new Mustang rolling off the line every hour during peak production. By war's end, 1550-86, P-51s of all variants had been manufactured, including 8 56D models alone, more than Japan's total fighter production over the last 2 years of the war. The long-range capabilities of Mustangs extended their reach to Tokyo and beyond, revolutionizing fighter operations. With dual 1-ton-gallon drop tanks, Mustangs could routinely fly round trips covering up to 1,500 statute miles, equivalent to flying from Los Angeles to Little Rock entirely over water in a single-engine aircraft. In critical situations, pilots pushed this range to 1,600 miles. This achievement was made possible by the Merlin engine's exceptional fuel efficiency during cruise settings, consuming only 65 gallons per hour at economical speeds, combined with the P-51's laminar flow wing design that reduced drag by 35% compared to conventional airfoils. North American's aerodynamicist Edgar Schmood designed a laminar flow wing that maintained smooth airflow over a larger portion of the wing surface, delaying turbulent flow and significantly reducing parasitic drag. In stark contrast was the Nakajima Ki-84 Hyatt, which entered service with the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service in June 1944, but arrived too late and in insufficient numbers to influence the war's outcome. Known as Gale by the Allies and designated Frank, this fighter aircraft symbolized Japan's last-ditch effort to counter American technological supremacy with limited resources. Despite being considered one of the best fighters operated en masse during World War II, the K-84 saw only what Japan termed mass production, which would be seen as a prototype run in America. The Hay-8 boasted impressive speed and maneuverability along with an armament consisting of up to 230-30mm Ho-55 cannons and 225 cannons and 225 cannons, providing substantial firepower. However, the reality was more nuanced than what was evident on paper. Each 30mm cannon carried only 50 rounds per gun, while each 20mm cannon had just 150 rounds, resulting in a total ammunition capacity of merely 400 rounds compared to the Mustang's range of 180 to 240 rounds. The Ki-84 was powered by the Nakajima Ha-645 Humming radial engine, a sophisticated unit with fuel injection, and a single Stage 2 speed supercharger assisted by water methanol injection. This setup provided an impressive takeoff power rating of 2,000 horsepower. Initial testing yielded promising results, with prototypes achieving speeds up to 38.7 mph in level flight, and later claims reaching as high as 47 mph under optimal conditions. However, the harsh realities of late-war Japanese production painted a different picture. Quality control plummeted, leading to desperate improvisations and systemic failures. Pilots found themselves dealing with maintenance issues related to the Hyatt's complex Nakajima engine and landing gear, prone to buckling during critical moments. Despite its theoretical power and advanced features, the Ha-45 suffered from chronic reliability issues, exacerbated by declining production standards due to constant B-29 bombardments and shortages of high-quality steel and aluminum. Poor heat treatment of late-war Japanese steel often left impurities in the landing gear units, causing them to buckle under stress. This resulted in many Hyatts being written off after struts collapsed on landing, leading to the loss of both aircraft and pilots who took months to train. The decline in production quality mirrored Japan's broader industrial crisis, a nation that had wagered everything on a swift victory, but found itself unprepared for protracted conflict. While American factories maintained high-quality standards throughout massive production runs and even improved over time as techniques were refined, Japanese manufacturing deteriorated rapidly. The lack of consistent quality control meant pilots could never be certain how individual aircraft would perform under various conditions, or whether the brakes would engage reliably, if engines would endure at full power settings, or if they could reach altitudes necessary to intercept B-29 Superfortresses flying at 30,000 feet. By 1945, Japan had manufactured a total of just 3 55-84 aircraft, and many of them were out of service due to shortages in spare parts, fuel, or trained pilots. The dire fuel situation highlighted the strategic calamity Japan faced. A nation that had initiated war partly to secure oil resources was now struggling. While American pilots flew with high-octane aviation gasoline sourced from refineries in Texas and California, designed for optimal engine performance, Japanese pilots were forced to use whatever fuel could be produced domestically or synthesized from coal. In the later stages of the war, the quality of Japanese aviation fuel often dropped below 87 octane, sometimes as low as 80 octane, reducing engine power and causing pre-ignition that damaged cylinders, pistons, and valves. Desperate units even resorted to supplementing their fuel with pine root oil extracted from stumps, alcohol distilled from sweet potatoes, and sake production byproducts, further compromising engine performance and reliability. Pilots frequently reported engines that barely started, ran rough at all power settings, and often failed catastrophically in flight. Captain R. Bridge of the 45th Fighter Squadron recalled, "It was truly spectacular. The B-29s were in the final stages of their formation when we arrived, creating a magnificent circle as they prepared for the mission. Their aluminum skin gleamed in the sun, resembling a school of enormous silver fish gliding through the sky." SAL was a testament to American navigation and planning capabilities that would have been unachievable without tech. The P-51s had flown 715 miles over open ocean, navigating primarily by dead reckoning and basic radio direction, finding techniques, timing their arrival within minutes of the bomber's schedule. They ascended gradually from sea level to 25,000 feet, with their engines automatically adjusting mixture ratios and superchargers seamlessly transitioning for optimal performance at various altitudes. As they crossed the coast of Honshu, P-51 pilots jettisoned their 110-gallon auxiliary wing tanks upon spotting more than 100 Japanese interceptors from multiple airfields around Tokyo, advancing towards them head-on. The silver drop tanks tumbled earthward, glinting in the morning sun and exploding on impact or bouncing across rice paddies. The Japanese pilots, flying a mix of Ki-84s, Ki-43s, Ki-61s, and naval fighters, including Zeros and the new Nik-2J Shidenkai, encountered their first surprise. They were facing land-based fighters that had somehow reached Japan from bases thought to be impossibly distant. Flight Sergeant Totanamizu, who flew a Ki-84 with the 56th Sentai, later expressed his astonishment about the event. "We were informed that information and wondered if it could be a miscommunication, possibly referring to incoming bombers instead of fighter planes. Being assured by our commanders that American fighters could not reach Japan from their distant bases. Yet there they were, numerous Mustangs flying confidently over our skies. At that moment, I realized the war was truly over." Major James B. Tapp, who later became an ace with 8 confirmed victories, was among the first P-51 pilots to engage Japanese formations. His combat report, written shortly after the mission, described the encounter with meticulous detail. "The Mustangs approached in standard 3-plane groups, but their coordination appeared inadequate. While the flight leaders initiated attacks, their wingmen frequently failed to support them effectively. They seemed hesitant and possibly low on fuel or ammunition, or perhaps they were just not well trained. Our speed advantage of 100 ms allowed us to dive through them, deliver quick bursts from our guns, and zoom climb back to altitude before the Japanese could react." The majority of experienced pilots had already been killed during battles over the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, the Philippines, or at the Marianas Turkey Shoot. Replacements received only about 50 hours of flight training before being deployed to combat zones, compared to the 600 hours provided to American pilots prior to their deployments. When the Mustangs returned to Iwima Base as the sun set, the Sunsetters from the 7th Fighter Command were credited with destroying 26 Japanese planes, 1 probable kill, and 5 damaged aircraft at a cost of 2 P-51s and 1 pilot. The initial mission's impressive kill ratio of 13-10 would only improve as American pilots gained more experience over Japan, while the quality of Japanese pilots continued to decline. Within a matter of weeks, kill ratios soared to levels ranging from 20-1 to an astounding 30-1, illustrating both American superiority and Japanese desperation. The performance gap between the aircraft became glaringly evident in aerial battles, especially during vertical maneuvers where much of the fighting took place. At higher altitudes, particularly above 20,000 feet, where most interceptions occurred, the P-51D's superior engine technology was clearly advantageous. Equipped with a 2-stage supercharger and an intercooler, the Merlin engine maintained optimal power even at high elevations, whereas Japanese engines faltered due to inadequate compression systems. The Ki-84's single-stage supercharger lacked both an intercooler and additional stages of compression, causing its power output to plummet significantly above 20,000 feet. Consequently, at 30,000 feet, the Ki-84 could barely sustain a speed of 3521 ms, while the P-51D managed nearly 4020 ms. Lieutenant Jerry Yellen from the 78th Fighter Squadron, who flew his last combat mission on August 14th in Japan, reflew his last combat mission on August 15th in Japan, described a typical engagement with vivid detail. As they approached enemy formations, he noted that Japanese aircraft would often leave dark exhaust trails as they pushed their engines to the limit while climbing. However, by 25,000 feet, these planes appeared sluggish and unresponsive. Their engines were smoking due to overly rich fuel mixtures caused by insufficient air intake from underpowered superchargers. During dives through enemy formations, Yellen's squadron would unleash a torrent of bullets from their 50 caliber machine guns, the tracer rounds appearing like laser beams against the sky. Japanese fighters struggled to keep up with the P-51D's speed and agility in both diving attacks and zoom climbs. As they pulled out of dives at speeds nearing 500 mph, the P-51D's robust structure and laminar flow wings allowed for precise control and stability. In contrast, Japanese aircraft often suffered from control surface failure or structural integrity issues at such high velocities, frequently resulting in catastrophic accidents. Control reversal was common as their planes approached transonic speeds, leading to loss of maneuverability and increased risk of wing separation. The disparity in pilot capabilities further accentuated the aerial dominance displayed by American forces. Pilots arriving at bases like Iwima typically logged between 400 and 600 hours of flight experience, including extensive training with their aircraft type and rigorous gunnery practice using captured enemy planes or advanced simulators. They were proficient in formation flying, instrument navigation under all weather conditions, deflection shooting for moving platforms, and combat tactics honed through 3 years of active engagement against seasoned instructors. In stark contrast, Japanese pilots in 1945 often had less than 100 hours of total flight experience, sometimes as little as 30 hours. Limited by shortages of ammunition for training purposes, they lacked comprehensive instrument flying skills and relied heavily on theoretical manuals rather than practical instruction from combat, experienced instructors who were either casualties or engaged in missions themselves. The sheer navigational challenge distinguished the competent from those destined for failure, separating the survivors from the imminent casualties. Flying single-engine fighters on 500-meter round trips over a vast ocean with limited navigation aids demanded both experience and trust in their aircraft and support systems. American pilots benefited from detailed weather briefings derived from submarine reports and reconnaissance flights, along with accurate maps updated through photo reconnaissance missions and instruments manufactured to strict specifications. They also had rescue submarines stationed at critical points along their routes, known as Lifeguard League submarines, which saved numerous downed airmen and could rely on Dumbo PBI Catalina flying boats for additional rescue efforts if pilots were forced into the water. In contrast, Japanese pilots often flew with outdated maps that failed to reflect recent bomb damage, unreliable compasses that had not been properly calibrated, and no assurance of rescue should they be downed over open waters. Their life rafts frequently leaked, and their emergency rations were often depleted due to food shortages on the ground. The magnetic variation between Iwo Jima and Tokyo in 1945 was 3° west, with Tokyo located between the 39th and 140th meridians, while Iwo Jima was situated between the 41st and 142nd. By flying southeastward, a pilot could count on eventually spotting Mount Surabaki rising above the ocean if they had sufficient fuel. The logistical support each side received highlighted the true nature of the Pacific Air War, which was essentially a contest between American abundance and Japanese scarcity. A single day's operation from Iwo involved nearly 10 Mustangs consuming 57,000 gallons of high-octane fuel and carrying 30,000 rounds of high-octane fuel and carrying 30,000 rounds of 50-caliber ammunition, along with bombs and rockets for ground attacks. This represented only a fraction of the daily operations at Iwo Jima alone, which was supported by 3 fighter groups. Behind this operation was an extensive supply chain stretching back to factories in Detroit, refineries in Texas, and ammunition plants in Missouri, connected by Liberty ships produced at a rate of 3 per day and C-54 Sky Transport aircraft flying regular cargo routes across the Pacific. Ships arrived daily at Iwo Jima, unloading fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food, mail, and other essential supplies to maintain the Air Force's operational readiness. In contrast, Japanese logistics had deteriorated into chaos and desperation. Aviation fuel was so scarce that training flights were canceled, leaving new pilots with little recent flying experience to face combat. Ammunition was rationed for even combat missions, forcing pilots to conserve rounds only for certain shots. The once poorly coordinated Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces now competed fiercely for the limited resources available, much like starving dogs fighting over scraps. Aircraft were cannibalized for spare parts until they became little more than aluminum skeletons, with entire fighter groups grounded due to shortages of tires, spark plugs, or hydraulic fluid. Some units attempted to manufacture their own spare parts in makeshift workshops, resulting in predictably poor outcomes. The technological disparity extended beyond just the aircraft themselves to encompass all operational aspects. American pilots utilized GITs that prevented blackouts during high-G maneuvers by squeezing blood back toward the brain, employed standardized oxygen systems that operated reliably above 30,000 feet with automatic flow regulation, and communicated via VHF radios featuring clear reception and multiple channels. Their parachutes were regularly inspected and repacked, while their life rafts contained functional radios and fresh supplies, and survival kits included a range of items from morphine to fishing gear. In contrast, Japanese pilots often flew without functioning radios. Their vacuum tube radios consumed significant battery power, but rarely worked properly anyway. They relied on unreliable oxygen systems that frequently failed above 20,000 feet, leading to hypoxia and disorientation. Additionally, they lacked GITs, which limited their ability to match the aggressive maneuvering of American pilots without experiencing blackouts or suffering broken blood vessels in their eyes. On June 1, 1945, known as Black Friday by Mustang men, weather rather than enemy action posed the greatest threat, demonstrating that even American technology had its limits. Approximately 19 Mustangs en route to Osaka encountered a blinding frontal system that wasn't predicted by weather forecasts. In mere minutes, 27 aircraft were lost due to weather conditions, with 24 of these losses attributed directly to disorientation in towering cumulus clouds, mid-air collisions, or running out of fuel while attempting to find clear air. This disaster highlighted the extreme challenges faced by even technologically superior Americans on very long-range missions. The weather front stretched from sea level to 40,000 feet with violent turbulence, icing conditions, and zero visibility. Elmo's fire dancing on their wings, compasses spinning uselessly, and artificial horizons tumbling due to the relentless motion. This event devastated Japanese morale irreparably. Captain Yoshio Yoshida, a key pilot of the 84th with the 47th Sentai who survived the war, noted in his diary, "The appearance of American fighters over Tokyo has shattered our confidence completely. We were told that B-29s were vulnerable without escort and that their fighters could never reach this far. Now we see Mustangs over the palace itself, strafing our airfields in broad daylight, shooting down our best pilots as if they were beginners. Stripe so confident and numerous tells us what our leaders will not admit. The war is lost, and we are merely waiting to die. In a post-war interview, Major Tapp described VLR missions as a true test of flying ability. Engaging with Japanese fighter pilots was thrilling and boosted adrenaline levels, but navigating from one point to another posed the greatest challenge. The vast expanse of ocean seemed endless and featureless, often causing disorientation. Pilots constantly checked their compasses, questioning whether they were heading in the right direction or had become lost. They spent up to 8 hours or more strapped into their cockpits without being able to stand, stretch, or use the restroom, except through a relief tube that often froze at high altitudes. Cramping legs felt like they were pierced by needles, while numb buttocks raised doubts about ever walking again. The constant fear of flying over vast stretches of open ocean in single-engine aircraft heightened anxiety, as one mechanical failure could result in almost certain death. The Mustang's cockpit design, honed through 3 years of combat and thousands of pilot reports, surpassed Japanese designs in every measurable aspect. The P-51D featured a bubble canopy providing 360-degree visibility, allowing pilots to look behind them by simply turning their heads, an invaluable feature during combat. The seat was fully adjustable for various body sizes, and the rudder pedals could be moved to accommodate different leg lengths. Controls were strategically positioned to minimize pilot fatigue over long missions. Instruments such as airspeed, altitude, and engine gauges were placed directly in the pilot's line of sight. In contrast, the Ki-84's cockpit, though an improvement over earlier Japanese fighters like the Zero, still had poor rear visibility due to structural members and a fuel tank behind the pilot's head. Controls were awkwardly positioned, requiring pilots to take their hands off the stick during critical moments. Additionally, instruments were challenging to read in combat conditions when pulling G-forces or experiencing engine vibration. Armament differences played a crucial role in determining combat outcomes. American guns were extraordinarily reliable with stoppage rates below 1% when properly maintained, thanks to dedicated armament specialists, and carried more ammunition, 80 rounds total, compared to the Ki-84's combined 400 rounds of cannon and machine gun ammo. This allowed American pilots to engage multiple targets without worrying about running out of ammunition, while also being able to take ranging shots reliably at distances up to 400 yards due to well-understood ballistics. Japanese pilots equipped with a combination of cannons and machine guns faced significant challenges due to varying ballistics and convergence zones, causing their cannon rounds to drop differently from their machine gun rounds, making accurate shooting nearly impossible at longer ranges. The disparity in training was even more evident. American pilots had accumulated thousands of rounds during training, owning skills such as leading targets, estimating range, and firing short bursts to prevent overheating. They practiced on towed sleeves, camera guns, and mock dog fights until deflection shooting became second nature. In contrast, Japanese pilots in 1945 were fortunate if they managed to fire just 100 rounds during training, with ammunition being too precious for extensive practice when it was needed for combat. Many entered their first engagements without having ever fired their weapons under realistic conditions. The last aerial engagement of the Sunsetter occurred near Tokyo on August 10, 1945, where the 15th and 56th Fighter Groups claimed 7 kills, one of the final air battles of World War II. By then, Japanese resistance had dwindled to a mere shadow of its former self, a force that once dominated the Pacific. Fuel shortages meant that many Japanese fighters were grounded, with their fuel reserves diverted for kamikaze missions. Those still in the air were often flown by teenage pilots who had barely received any training, some having been high school students just months prior, Overall, EDO's Mustangs were credited with shooting down 206 Japanese aircraft between April and August 1945, accounting for approximately 75% of all Pacific P-51 aerial victories during this period. The actual number was likely higher, given that many shot down planes over Japan went unconfirmed due to wreckage being lost in forests or urban aerial combat. With P-51s patrolling the skies, B-29 bombers could conduct daylight raids with greater precision, systematically crippling Japan's industrial infrastructure. The country's already beleaguered production capacity suffered further as material shortages and relentless bombing brought industry to a near standstill. This assault had profound psychological implications. Japanese civilians witnessed American fighters strafing airfields in broad daylight, attacking trains and shipping in Tokyo Bay, clearly signaling that Japan had lost control of its airspace. The belief in the divine protection known as the kamikaze winds was shattered when Allied fighters flew over the Imperial Palace itself. Lieutenant Colonel John R. Morgan from the 45th 7th Fighter Squadron carried out numerous photoreconnaissance flights over Japan using a P-51D that had been adapted with cameras instead of weaponry. His findings exposed the extent to which Japanese aviation capabilities had deteriorated. During our sorties, we would fly over airfields reported to house hundreds of aircraft, but often found only around a dozen operational planes. The rest were inoperable and scattered about as mere shells without engines or propellers. Some of these derelicts were even cannibalized for spare parts. To mislead our photo interpreters, Japanese forces pushed around a few operational planes, making it seem like they had more flyable aircraft than was actually true. We could clearly distinguish between genuine airplanes and decoys, known as hulks. Furthermore, some airfields featured fake wooden replicas of aircraft, complete with painted insignia to divert our attention away from real planes hidden in revetments or under camouflage. The stark numerical data illustrated the war's progression. Throughout World War II, American factories produced 1550-86 P-51s across all variants, surpassing Japan's total aircraft production in both 1945 combined. Japan manufactured approximately 3,500 Ki-8T4 fighters during the same period, but many were destroyed on the ground by B-29 raids and carrier attacks, or grounded due to poor quality control and lack of spare parts. As American production surged towards its peak output of around 20 P-51s per day, Japanese aircraft manufacturing faltered dramatically. The consistency in American aircraft production was evident. Each P-51 was essentially identical with interchangeable parts, whereas the quality and performance of Japanese fighters varied widely even within the same batch. The training programs also reflected this disparity. By 1945, the United States was annually training 30,000 pilots who received extensive flight instruction, ranging from 200 to 300 hours before advanced fighter training and an additional 100 hours of combat training. In contrast, Japan's pilot training had essentially collapsed by this point, with new recruits receiving as little as 50 hours of training, or even less before being thrust into operational units. The attrition rates further emphasized the overwhelming advantage enjoyed by American forces. The United States was able to sustain its losses while preserving the quality of its forces, whereas Japan struggled to replace its casualties even when lowering standards significantly. A single P-51 mission from Iwama required around 600 gallons of 100A octane fuel per aircraft, including both internal tanks and drop tanks. With approximately 100 aircraft participating in each daily mission, this equated to 60,000 gallons of fuel used by a single fighter group alone every day. American oil tankers supplied millions of gallons monthly to Pacific bases, forming an unceasing flow of fuel across the ocean. In contrast, Japan attempted to extract aviation fuel from pine roots, requiring about 2,000 stumps to produce just 1 gallon of barely usable fuel. Furthermore, due to a lack of fuel for conventional operations, training aircraft were converted into kamikaze weapons. By August 1945, Japan had less than 200,000 gallons of aviation fuel left in the home islands, sufficient only for perhaps a single major operation. The P-51D symbolized more than just performance statistics. It encapsulated an entire approach to warfare through technological advancements. The aircraft exemplified American industrial principles, such as mass production with quality control, standardization among manufacturers, and continuous refinement based on combat feedback. Each P-51D that rolled off the assembly line was identical in design, featuring interchangeable parts and predictable performance characteristics. A pilot could step into any P-51D and immediately know how it would behave, familiarizing them with every switch and instrument's location. In contrast, Japanese aircraft were increasingly hand-built using inconsistent materials and substitute components, resulting in significant performance disparities even within the same production run. One plane might achieve 400 mpaf, while another from the same factory could only reach 305 mpaf due to manufacturing inconsistencies. Brigadier General Ernest Mpaf, who commanded the 7th Fighter Command, later stated, "There is no doubt that the P-51 was the best propeller-driven fighter of World War II. It served as our top air superiority fighter and excelled in escort missions. In ground attack roles, it was on par with the P-47. This evaluation not only highlighted the aircraft's superior performance, but also its reliability, maintainability, and adaptability to the rigorous demands of long-range operations. The P-51 could be refueled and rearmed within 30 minutes, capable of flying twice daily if necessary, and able to operate from rough coral runways that would have damaged more delicate aircraft. The maintenance data highlighted a significant aspect of American superiority. Despite harsh conditions at Iwo Jima, P-51D fighters maintained an operational rate above 80%. The base faced challenges such as volcanic dust infiltrating everything and salt air causing aluminum corrosion, along with limited facilities forcing most maintenance to be done outdoors. Ground crews could replace engines in just 4 hours, thanks to mobile cranes and standardized procedures. Battle damage that would ground a Japanese fighter for weeks was often repaired overnight using prefabricated parts shipped from the United States. In contrast, the Ki-84 aircraft suffered serviceability rates below 40%, sometimes dropping as low as 20%. The complex Humar engine required specialized tools that were frequently unavailable. Additionally, trained technicians were often killed or reassigned to combat units, and spare parts had to be hand-fitted due to poor manufacturing tolerances. Weather reconnaissance also provided a critical advantage, saving numerous American lives. Dedicated B-29s conducted weather surveillance missions hours before fighter operations began, reporting on cloud conditions, wind speeds, and frontal systems. Although Black Friday demonstrated that even the best-prepared missions could still encounter unexpected weather surprises, Japanese forces often flew into dangerous weather conditions without adequate information, leading to significant losses. The American capability to predict and avoid adverse weather fronts greatly reduced operational losses. In contrast, Japanese units frequently suffered catastrophic weather-related casualties that exceeded combat death. High-frequency radio beacons transmitted from submarines and island bases provided real-time weather updates. Submarine-based rescue coordination could direct search aircraft to downed pilots, creating a safety network that bolstered pilot confidence in the extreme range capabilities of their aircraft. The psychological benefit of knowing help would arrive if they were shot down cannot be understated. Japanese pilots often flew with non-functional radios and no expectation of rescue if forced to land, facing each mission with fatalistic acceptance of probable death. Their farewell ceremonies before missions were literal, as they anticipated never returning. Captain Harry Krim Jr., who would later achieve ace status with 7 victories while flying over Japan as part of the 5031st Fighter Squadron, saw the situation clearly. Allowing them to operate freely at any time, been place they chose. Each P-51 fighter plane over Tokyo served as a stark reminder that Japan had lost the war. We no longer needed to fight for air supremacy, we already held it. Our missions now focused on demonstrating our dominance and asserting the futility of further resistance. The extended range operations fundamentally altered the strategic landscape in the Pacific, making previous assessments irrelevant. Distance, which had long shielded Japanese territories from invasion, was no longer a reliable defense. For 3 years, Japan's industrial centers remained largely untouched by enemy forces, but now they faced daily assaults. The sight of American fighters over Tokyo dispelled any lingering illusions about Japan's defensive capabilities and the myth of divine protection. It became evident that defeat was not just possible but unavoidable. The human toll reflected a stark disparity in technological advancements. From July 1st to August 15th, 1945, 85 American fighter pilots lost their lives during very long-range missions. However, only a handful were downed by enemy aircraft, perhaps 5 or 6, with most casualties attributed to operational issues such as weather conditions, mechanical failures, navigation errors, and pilot failures, pilot fatal mistakes. In contrast, Japanese losses numbered in the hundreds, possibly over 1,000, including entire squadrons wiped out while futilely attempting to intercept American formations. By August, the 47th Sentai, which had begun April with 40 operational pilots, had been reduced to just 3 remaining flyers. The 204th Sentai suffered complete destruction twice, first when it was wiped out and then reconstituted with new pilots who also met a similar fate shortly after. The final dogfights over Japan signaled the ultimate collapse of Japanese air power as an organized entity. On August 14, 1945, August 15 in Japan, due to time zone differences, Lieutenant Jerry Yellen took off from Iwima with his wingman, Second Lieutenant Philip Schlamberg, who was just 19 years old. Their mission, scheduled before the news of Japan's surrender reached them, involved attacking airfields near Nagoya. They launched their attack without receiving the recall code word Utah that would have brought them back to base. Yellen and Schlamberg strafed their targets and headed home, diving into a cloud formation to avoid anti-aircraft fire. When Yellen emerged from the clouds, Schlamberg had vanished. He was shot down by ground forces, becoming the last American combat casualty of World War II. Even though Japan was on the brink of defeat and the Emperor's surrender broadcast had already been recorded, Japanese anti-aircraft units continued to engage with intense determination. Notably absent were Japanese fighter planes, which no longer existed as an effective force due to a lack of fuel, pilots, or destruction. The overwhelming superiority of American air power made it clear that Japan could no longer defend its airspace. The P-51D Mustang, boasting a top speed of 440 mph and a range of up to 2,000 miles with drop tanks, along with 6 reliable machine guns carrying nearly 2,000 rounds of ammunition, rendered the Japanese home islands defenseless against daylight air attacks. It was not a contest between equals, but rather a foregone conclusion, determined by American industrial might as much as by combat over Tokyo. Oil factories in Detroit and oil wells in Texas contributed significantly to this outcome. American technological superiority, combined with exceptional training and production capabilities, ultimately achieved what naval blockades and island hopping could not: the complete neutralization of Japan's air defenses. The B-29 bombers that dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki flew without fighter escort because none was required. Japanese aerial opposition had been eliminated by the overwhelming superiority of American forces. Out of 3 1414 K-84s built, only one remains today. It resides in the Shirin Peace Museum located in Kagoshima, Japan, serving as a solitary testament to Japan's frantic efforts to catch up with American advancements. Meanwhile, hundreds of P-51 Mustangs can still be found in museums and private collections around the world, often participating in air shows where their Merlin engines roar triumphantly, decades after first appearing over Tokyo. The contrast between the surviving aircraft underscores an important narrative. American planes were constructed to endure, meticulously maintained, and revered as historical treasures, whereas Japanese aircraft were designed for immediate deployment and thus considered expendable. When Japanese pilots encountered P-51 Mustangs above Tokyo, it was more than just tactical surprise. It was a shocking revelation of American industrial prowess and technological progress that rendered the impossible routine. Course Act. The P-51D Mustang soaring over Mount Fuji was more than an aircraft. It symbolized American industrial dominance, technological ingenuity, and the overwhelming power of total war logistics. This lesson was starkly evident in modern warfare. Superior technology combined with vast production capacity equates to victory. Against this backdrop, Japan's K-84 Hyatt, despite individual bravery and occasional tactical successes, stood little chance. The appearance of American fighters over Tokyo was fundamentally a confrontation with the mathematical reality that industrial might surpasses warrior spirit. The Mustang's mission was executed with ruthless efficiency, demonstrating that distance offered no defense. Industrial strength overpowered martial valor, and technological superiority, when effectively applied, became insurmountable. The appearance of the P-51D Mustang over Tokyo demonstrated that the era of samurai warriors had given way to an age dominated by assembly lines, supercharged engines, and long-range fighter escorts. The divine winds were no match for scientific progress. The warrior ethos succumbed to industrial power, and Japan's rising sun was eclipsed by aircraft made of aluminum and powered by robust engines.